The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of Bagram Airfield like a blade through silk. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez pressed his headset closer to his ear, straining to make sense of the garbled transmission coming through Channel 16. What he heard made his blood run cold. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Kodiak 61. We are taking heavy fire from all directions. Grid 41S, UD 23,840, 715,632. 8 souls on board, 2 critical. We need immediate close air support or we're not making it home." The Navy SEAL team had been inserted 12 hours earlier into the Korangal Valley, that notorious stretch of Afghan wilderness where helicopters went to die and good men became memories. Their mission: extract a high-value target who claimed to have intelligence on the Taliban's new surface-to-air missile capabilities. Intelligence that could save dozens of American aircraft and the pilots who flew them. Now they were pinned down in a narrow ravine, surrounded by an estimated 40 Taliban fighters with RPGs and heavy machine guns. The terrain was impossible, vertical rock walls on 3 sides, with only one escape route that led directly through a gauntlet of enemy fire. 3 previous close air support missions had been scrubbed. The AC-130 couldn't get a clear shot without risking the SEAL team. The Apache helicopters couldn't descend low enough through the mountain thermals and enemy fire. In the Tactical Operations Center, Colonel Marcus Webb stared at the digital map display, his weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of multiple screens. 26 years of military service had taught him to read between the lines of radio chatter, and what he heard in Kodiak 61's voice was pure desperation masked by professional calm. "Sir," called out Captain Thompson from the communications station, "we've exhausted all conventional options. The valley walls are too steep, the ceiling too low, and the enemy has overlapping fields of fire covering every approach vector." Webb's jaw tightened. He'd been in similar situations before, watched good men die because the mission parameters exceeded the capabilities of their aircraft. The Korangal was a graveyard of helicopters and dreams, littered with the wreckage of machines that had dared to fly where angels feared to tread. Then, from the corner of the operations center, a voice spoke up, calm, measured, with just a hint of southern drawl that seemed out of place in the testosterone-heavy environment. "Colonel, request permission to speak freely." Webb turned to see Major Cassandra Storm Thorne standing beside the weather station, her flight suit crisp despite having been on standby for 14 straight hours. At 5'6" with auburn hair pulled back in regulation fashion, she looked more like a college professor than one of the most experienced A-10 Thunderbolt pilots in the Air Force. The room fell silent. Major Thorne had been stationed at Bagram for 6 months, flying close air support missions with a precision that bordered on artistic. But she was also known for something else, a reputation for taking risks that made even veteran pilots uncomfortable. Some called her reckless. Others whispered that she had a death wish, flying her A-10 Warthog through valleys and canyons that satellite imagery suggested were impossible to navigate. Webb had heard the stories, seen the gun camera footage that defied physics and common sense. Thorne could thread her aircraft through mountain passes with clearances measured in feet rather than yards, deliver ordnance with surgical precision while flying at altitudes that made radar operators nervous, and somehow always bring her bird home without so much as a scratch on the fuselage. But the Korangal Valley was different. It wasn't just dangerous. It was a death sentence wrapped in morning mist and rocky outcroppings. "What do you have in mind, Major?" Webb asked, though something in his gut already knew the answer. Thorne stepped forward, her green eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Sir, I've been studying the topographical data for that valley since the SEALs were inserted. There's a flight path, narrow but doable. I can get down there, suppress the enemy positions, and give Kodiak 61 the cover they need to extract." The operations center erupted in a chorus of concerned voices. Captain Thompson shook his head vigorously. Major, with all due respect, that valley has a ceiling of less than 200 feet in some places. The downdrafts alone would tear an aircraft apart, not to mention the enemy fire. The approach angle is impossible, added Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the wing's operations officer. Even if you could get down there, the terrain would funnel you directly into overlapping kill zones. It would be suicide. But Thorne's expression never wavered. She'd spent countless hours studying this exact scenario, running flight simulations in her head while lying awake in her bunk. The Koringal Valley wasn't just another tactical problem to be solved, it was personal. 2 months earlier, she'd lost her wingman, Captain James Bucket Morrison, when his F-16 was shot down by a surface-to-air missile over similar terrain. She'd been forced to watch helplessly as his ejection seat malfunctioned, unable to descend through the enemy fire to provide assistance. Webb studied her face, recognizing something he'd seen in his own mirror after too many years of combat, the look of someone carrying ghosts. The radio crackled again, more urgent this time. Any station, this is Kodiak 6-1. We have wounded requiring immediate medical attention. Request immediate close air support, over. The desperation was becoming impossible to mask. Webb looked around the room at his staff, seeing doubt and fear in their eyes. Standard procedures dictated waiting for better weather, better intelligence, better options. But sometimes there were no better options. "Major Thorne," he said finally, "you're telling me you can fly an A-10 through terrain that's already claimed 3 helicopters and get close enough to those enemy positions to make a difference?" "Sir, I'm not just telling you I can do it," she replied, her voice steady as mountain stone. "I'm telling you I'm the only one who can." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant rumble of generators and the occasional burst of radio static. Every person in that operations center understood the implications. If Thorne failed, 8 Navy SEALs would die in a valley that had already become synonymous with American tragedy. If she succeeded, it would rewrite the tactical manual for close air support in mountain warfare. But there was something else in the air that morning, something that had nothing to do with meteorological conditions or enemy capabilities. It was the weight of reputation, the burden of being different in a profession that valued conformity, and the constant need to prove that skill mattered more than gender when bullets started flying. Major Cassandra Thorne had been fighting that battle her entire career, and the Koringal Valley was about to become her final exam. Webb made his decision with the kind of institutional courage that separated leaders from managers. "Major, you have permission to attempt the mission. But understand this, I'm not ordering you to fly this profile. I'm asking if you're willing to volunteer." Thorne's response came without hesitation. "Sir, I volunteered the day I pinned on these wings." 20 minutes later, she was walking toward her aircraft through the pre-dawn darkness, her helmet bag slung over one shoulder, and her survival vest heavy with emergency equipment. The A-10 Thunderbolt II sat on the tarmac like a sleeping predator, its distinctive twin engines and straight wings giving it the unmistakable appearance of controlled lethality. Built around the massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon, the A-10 was designed for one purpose: destroying enemy armor and providing close air support to ground forces. It was not a graceful aircraft by any conventional definition. Where other fighters prioritized speed and maneuverability, the Warthog emphasized survivability and firepower. Its titanium bathtub cockpit could withstand direct hits from anti-aircraft artillery. Its redundant flight systems meant it could continue flying even with major structural damage. But what made the A-10 truly special wasn't its armor or its weapons. It was its ability to fly low and slow, to get down in the dirt with the ground forces, and provide precision fire support in situations where faster aircraft would be useless. As Thorne approached her bird, she could see her crew chief, Senior Airman Martinez, completing the final pre-flight inspection. Martinez had been working on A-10s for 8 years, and he developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when something was different about a mission. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the quiet professionalism that defined the best enlisted personnel. "She's ready to go, but I've got to ask, this isn't a standard CAS mission, is it?" Thorne paused in her walk-around inspection, running her hand along the aircraft's leading edge. The metal was cold to the touch, still radiating the chill of the Afghan night. "No, Sergeant Martinez, this one's different." He nodded, understanding passing between them without need for further explanation. In 8 years of maintaining combat aircraft, Martinez had learned to read the subtle signs that distinguished routine missions from the ones that made history. The way pilots moved differently, spoke differently, carried themselves with the weight of knowing they were about to attempt something that existed at the very edge of possibility. "Ma'am, I've been working on this bird for 6 months now, and she's never let you down. Whatever you're planning to do out there, she'll get you through it." Thorne completed her inspection and climbed into the cockpit, settling into the familiar embrace of ejection seat and instrument panels. The A-10's cockpit was designed for functionality rather than comfort, every switch and display positioned for rapid access during high-stress situations. As she began the startup sequence, the twin General Electric TF-34 engines spooled up with their characteristic high-pitched whine, a sound that had become synonymous with salvation for ground forces around the world. The radio crackled to life as she contacted ground control. "Bagram ground, Storm 4-1, ready to taxi." "Storm 4-1, Bagram ground, taxi runway 09, wind 080 at 12, altimeter 2997. As she taxied toward the runway, Thorne could feel the weight of expectations settling around her like a familiar coat. In the operations center, she knew Webb and his staff were watching her progress on radar, tracking her movement toward a mission that would either validate her reputation or end it permanently. The SEAL team was still pinned down in the valley, their ammunition running low and their wounded growing weaker with each passing minute. Time was not a luxury they could afford, and the margin for error had been reduced to zero. At the runway threshold, Thorne ran through her final checks one more time. Engine parameters, normal, flight controls, free and clear, weapons systems, armed and ready. She took a deep breath, tasting the recycled air of her oxygen mask, and keyed her radio. "Bagram Tower, Storm 4-1, ready for takeoff." "Storm 4-1, Bagram Tower, cleared for takeoff, runway 09. Wind 080 at 15, gusts to 22. The crosswind would make the takeoff more challenging, but compared to what lay ahead, it was merely a minor inconvenience. Thorne advanced the throttles to military power and felt the familiar surge of acceleration as 12,000 pounds of thrust pushed her aircraft down the runway. The A-10 lifted off smoothly, climbing into the darkness above Afghanistan's mountainous landscape. As she retracted the landing gear and began her turn toward the Korangal Valley, Thorne allowed herself one moment to consider the magnitude of what she was attempting. The tactical situation was unprecedented. The terrain was impossible. The enemy was well prepared and heavily armed. But 8 American warriors were depending on her, and that was the only calculation that mattered. Below her, the lights of Bagram Airfield grew smaller and dimmer, until they were just another constellation in the vast darkness of Central Asia. Ahead lay the Korangal Valley, that legendary graveyard of aircraft and dreams, where the morning sun would soon illuminate either triumph or tragedy. The radio crackled with the voice of Kodiak 6-1, weaker now but still professional. Any station, this is Kodiak 6-1. We're running low on everything that matters out here. If somebody's coming, now would be good." Thorne keyed her microphone, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had made peace with the impossible. "Kodiak 6-1, this is Storm 4-1. I'm 20 minutes out and coming in fast. Hold tight, gentlemen. The cavalry is on the way. In the operations center at Bagram, Colonel Webb stared at the radar screen showing a single contact moving steadily toward the most dangerous airspace in Afghanistan. Around him, his staff maintained their professional composure, but he could feel the tension radiating from every person in the room. Captain Thompson leaned over the communications console, monitoring multiple radio frequencies simultaneously. "Sir, we're picking up increased enemy radio chatter in the valley. They know something's coming." Webb nodded grimly. The Taliban weren't stupid. They understood that a downed SEAL team would eventually attract American air power, and they'd had 12 hours to prepare their defenses. Whatever Major Thorne was flying into, it wouldn't be a surprise attack. "Any word from higher headquarters on additional assets?" Webb asked. "Negative, sir. The closest Apache support is 40 minutes out, and the AC-130 is still refueling at Kandahar. Storm 41 is on her own for at least the next hour." The mathematics of combat were brutally simple. 8 Navy SEALs with limited ammunition and medical supplies, surrounded by an estimated 40 Taliban fighters with heavy weapons and prepared positions. One A-10 pilot with exceptional skills but no backup, flying into terrain that had already proven deadly to multiple aircraft. Webb had been making these kinds of calculations for more than 2 decades, weighing American lives against tactical possibilities, measuring courage against capability. But this situation felt different, charged with a complexity that went beyond standard risk assessment. Major Thorne's reputation preceded her like a storm front. She'd arrived at Bagram 6 months earlier with a service record that read like something from a recruitment poster. Distinguished graduate of the Air Force Academy, top of her class in undergraduate pilot training, weapons school graduate, combat veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan with over 200 combat missions. But statistics never told the complete story. What made Thorne unique wasn't her technical proficiency or her academic achievements. It was her willingness to attempt missions that other pilots considered impossible. She flew her A-10 with an intuitive understanding of its capabilities that bordered on supernatural, threading through mountain valleys and urban canyons, with a precision that defied conventional wisdom about aircraft performance. The problem was that exceptional skill could easily be mistaken for recklessness, and in a profession where risk management was paramount, Thorne's tactics sometimes made her colleagues uncomfortable. She'd been passed over for promotion twice, not because of any deficiency in her performance, but because some commanders worried that her aggressive flying style might encourage others to take similar risks. Webb understood the institutional dynamics at play. The Air Force valued predictability and standardization, qualities that didn't always align with the kind of improvisation that combat situations often demanded. Thorne represented something that made bureaucrats nervous, a pilot who thought outside the tactical manual and made decisions based on situational assessment rather than predetermined procedures. But Webb also understood something that the bureaucrats sometimes missed. In combat, the manual was a starting point, not a destination. When American lives hung in the balance, sometimes the difference between success and failure came down to finding someone willing to attempt what everyone else considered impossible. The radio crackled with a new transmission. Bagram Control, Storm 41, approaching the valley entrance, beginning descent to attack altitude. Webb picked up his microphone, his voice carrying the weight of command authority. "Storm 41, Bagram Control. You are cleared to engage targets of opportunity. Rules of engagement are weapons free on any hostile forces in your area of operations. Be advised, we show multiple surface-to-air threats in your vicinity." Copy Bagram Control. Storm 41 is weapons free and going in. The radar contact that represented Major Thorne's aircraft began descending rapidly, dropping from 12,000 feet to 8,000, then 6,000, disappearing and reappearing as the mountainous terrain interfered with radar coverage. In the valley below, the SEAL team huddled in whatever cover they could find among the rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Diesel Washington pressed his back against a boulder, reloading his M4 carbine while bullets whined overhead and impacted against the rocks around his position. Washington had been a Navy SEAL for 14 years, long enough to develop an instinctive feel for tactical situations. The enemy had positioned themselves well, using the natural terrain to create overlapping fields of fire that made movement nearly impossible. Every attempt to advance or withdraw had been met with accurate fire from multiple positions. Chief called out Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez from a position 20 meters away. "We're down to our last magazines, and Thompson's bleeding pretty bad. We need that air support now." Washington keyed his radio, switching to the frequency they'd been given for close air support coordination. "Storm 4-1, this is Kodiak 6-1 actual. We have you on comms. What's your position?" The response came immediately, the pilot's voice clear and professional despite the tactical complexity of her situation. "Kodiak 6-1, Storm 4-1. I have you in sight, approximately 2 clicks from your position and descending. I see multiple muzzle flashes on the high ground to your north and east. Can you give me target confirmation?" Washington risked a quick look over his cover, spotting the distinctive silhouette of an A-10 Warthog dropping through the mountain thermals like a controlled avalanche. The aircraft was flying at an altitude that seemed impossible given the terrain, weaving between rocky outcroppings and following the natural contours of the valley floor. Storm 4-1 confirmed hostile positions on the high ground. "We're marked with infrared strobes, and we have 2 urgent surgical casualties requiring immediate extraction." "Copy, Kodiak 6-1. I'm going to make a gun run on the northern positions first, then work east. Keep your heads down." What happened next would be analyzed and debated in tactical schools for years to come. Major Thorne rolled her A-10 into a diving attack that defied every conventional principle of close air support in mountainous terrain. Instead of making high-altitude passes from a safe distance, she brought her aircraft down to what military aviators call the weeds, an altitude so low that she was flying between the mountain peaks rather than over them. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon opened fire with its distinctive sound, a deep, grinding roar that resembled nothing so much as a chainsaw operated by giants. 30mm depleted uranium rounds impacted the enemy positions with devastating precision, each burst lasting only 2 seconds, but delivering enough firepower to suppress entire squads of enemy fighters. But it wasn't just the accuracy of her fire that made the attack remarkable, it was the flying itself. Thorne was piloting her A-10 through terrain that required constant stick and rudder inputs, making minute adjustments to avoid rock outcroppings and sudden altitude changes caused by mountain thermals. The aircraft's flight path resembled something between a precision aerobatic routine and controlled chaos. In the SEAL position, Washington watched in amazement as the A-10 pulled up from its gun run, executed a knife-edge turn around a rocky pinnacle, and immediately rolled into another attack from a completely different angle. The enemy positions that had been pouring accurate fire on his team suddenly went silent as Taliban fighters sought cover from the withering aerial assault. "Jesus," whispered Rodriguez, "she's flying that thing like it's a helicopter." The radio crackled with Thorne's voice, calm and professional despite the complexity of her tactical situation. "Kodiak 6-1, Storm 4-1. Northern positions are suppressed. I'm repositioning for the eastern slope. How copy?" "Storm 4-1, excellent work. The eastern positions are approximately 500 meters from our location, bearing 087 degrees. We have positive identification of at least 12 enemy personnel with RPGs and heavy machine guns." "Copy, I have them spotted. Stand by for gun run number 2. What followed was a master class in low-level attack flying. Thorne brought her A-10 in from the south, using a rocky ridge to mask her approach until the last possible moment. When she cleared the ridge line, she was less than 200 feet above the valley floor, close enough that the SEAL team could clearly see the aircraft's distinctive paint scheme and weapons configurations. The second gun run was even more impressive than the first. Thorne walked her cannon fire across the eastern positions with surgical precision, neutralizing enemy fighters while avoiding any risk to the friendly forces below. The aircraft's titanium armor plating sparked and flashed as small arms fire impacted against the fuselage, but the A-10 continued its attack run without deviation. As she pulled up from the second pass, Thorne's voice came over the radio with a slight edge that hadn't been there before. Kodiak 6-1, be advised I'm taking moderate ground fire from multiple positions. I count at least 6 more enemy locations on the southern slope. This is going to take some time to work through. Washington understood the implications immediately. Every attack run brought Thorne's aircraft deeper into the valley, where the terrain limited her maneuvering options and made her more vulnerable to enemy fire. The Taliban fighters were learning to anticipate her attack patterns, adjusting their positions, and timing their fire to catch her aircraft during the most vulnerable portions of each gun run. Storm 4-1, understand you're taking fire. We can adjust our position if it helps your attack geometry. Negative, Kodiak 6-1. You stay put and keep your heads down. I'm going to work the southern positions now, then come back for any squirters that try to relocate. The third attack run was when things began to go wrong. Thorne had identified a cluster of enemy positions on a steep slope, approximately 800 meters south of the SEAL team's location. The terrain approach required her to descend through a narrow canyon between 2 rock formations, execute the gun run at extremely low altitude, then climb steeply to clear the ridge line on the far side of the valley. It was a tactical profile that pushed both pilot and aircraft to the absolute limits of their capabilities. The A-10's twin engines were already working hard in the thin mountain air, and the constant maneuvering had burned through a significant portion of her fuel reserves. As Thorne rolled into the attack dive, she could see muzzle flashes from at least 8 different positions scattered across the rocky slope. The enemy had learned from her previous attacks, spreading their forces to make targeting more difficult while maintaining overlapping fields of fire that could engage her aircraft throughout the entire attack run. The GAU-8 cannon roared again, its depleted uranium rounds carving through enemy positions with devastating effect. But this time, the Taliban fighters were ready. As Thorne pulled up from her gun run, climbing steeply to clear the ridge line, multiple RPGs launched simultaneously from concealed positions. The first rocket-propelled grenade missed her aircraft by less than 50 feet, close enough that the proximity fuse detonated and sent shrapnel fragments against the A-10's armored fuselage. The second RPG impacted directly against her left engine nacelle. In the operations center at Bagram, Captain Thompson watched his radar screen with growing concern as Storm 4-1's altitude and speed began fluctuating erratically. "Sir, I'm showing unusual flight parameters on Storm 4-1. Altitude varying between 6 and 8,000 feet, airspeed inconsistent." Webb grabbed his microphone. "Storm 4-1, Bagram Control, what's your status?" The response came after a pause that felt like an eternity. "Bagram Control, Storm 4-1. I've taken an RPG hit to the left engine. Engine fire light is on, but the fire suppression system has activated. I'm continuing the mission." The casual tone of her transmission belied the severity of the situation. An engine fire in an A-10 was a serious emergency under normal circumstances. An engine fire while flying at extremely low altitude in mountainous terrain, under enemy fire, was potentially catastrophic. "Storm 4-1, recommend you abort the mission and return to base immediately for emergency landing." Negative, Bagram Control. Kodiak 6-1 is still in contact and needs immediate fire support. I can continue on one engine. Webb felt his stomach clench. He'd been in similar situations before, watching pilots make the kind of decisions that separated heroes from statistics. The smart tactical decision was for Thorne to leave immediately, climb to a safe altitude, and return to Bagram for an emergency landing. The courageous decision was to continue the mission despite the mechanical problems and increased risk. The problem was that in combat aviation, smart and courageous weren't always the same thing. Down in the valley, Chief Washington had heard the radio exchange and understood the implications. The A-10 that had been providing them with life-saving fire support was now flying with significant battle damage, and its pilot was choosing to continue the mission rather than seek safety. Storm 41, this is Kodiak 61 actual. We understand your aircraft status. If you need to RTB, we can hold our position until additional air support arrives. The response came immediately, with a slight edge of determination that made Washington suspect this pilot wasn't going anywhere. Kodiak 61, Storm 41, negative on the RTB. I've still got one good engine, plenty of ammunition, and a clear picture of the tactical situation. Let's finish this. What happened over the next 20 minutes became the stuff of military legend. Flying her damaged A-10 with single-engine power, Major Thorne executed a series of attack runs that systematically eliminated every enemy position in the valley. She adapted her tactics to compensate for the aircraft's reduced performance, using terrain masking and pop-up attacks to minimize her exposure to ground fire, while maintaining the precision that had made her previous runs so effective. The single-functioning engine meant reduced climb performance and longer exposure times during each attack profile. The fire-damaged flight controls required constant attention and compensation, but Thorne flew her crippled aircraft like it was an extension of her own will, coaxing performance from damaged systems and finding tactical solutions that existed at the intersection of skill and inspiration. By the time the sun crested the eastern peaks of the Korangal Valley, the last enemy muzzle flash had been silenced. The Taliban forces that had pinned down the SEAL team for over 12 hours had been systematically destroyed by a single pilot flying a battle-damaged aircraft through terrain that military textbooks classified as unsuitable for fixed-wing operations. Kodiak 61, Storm 41. I show no further enemy activity in your area. The valley is clear for extraction. Washington keyed his radio, his voice carrying a respect that went beyond standard military protocol. Storm 41, Kodiak 61 actual. Outstanding work. We have 2 urgent surgical cases ready for immediate extraction and 6 ambulatory personnel. Request you maintain overwatch until our ride arrives. Copy, Kodiak 61. I'll maintain a high orbit until your extraction is complete. As Thorne climbed her damaged A-10 to a safer altitude, she could see dust clouds in the distance marking the approach of rescue helicopters. The SEAL team would be extracted within the hour, their wounded would receive proper medical care, and the intelligence they'd gathered would save countless American lives. But for Major Cassandra Thorne, the mission was far from over. She still had to fly her battle-damaged aircraft back to Bagram Airfield, execute an emergency landing with single-engine power, and hope that her damaged flight controls would hold together long enough to get her safely on the ground. The radio crackled with Webb's voice from Bagram Control. Storm 41, we have emergency equipment standing by. What are your intentions for recovery? Thorne looked at her instrument panel, noting the various warning lights and system malfunctions that painted a picture of an aircraft that was flying on determination and luck. The left engine was completely shut down, the hydraulic system was operating at reduced pressure, and several flight control surfaces were responding sluggishly. Bagram Control, Storm 41 requesting straighten approach to runway 09. I'll need the emergency equipment to roll, but I think we can make this work. 30 minutes later, Major Thorne's A-10 touched down on Bagram's runway with the kind of precision that made her emergency landing look routine. The aircraft rolled to a stop surrounded by fire trucks and ambulances, its battle-scarred fuselage testament to a mission that had pushed both pilot and machine beyond their normal limits. As Thorne climbed out of her cockpit, she was met by Colonel Webb and a crowd of maintenance personnel, intelligence officers, and fellow pilots who had monitored her mission from beginning to end. Senior Airman Martinez approached her aircraft with the expression of someone examining a miracle. "Ma'am," he said, running his hands along the RPG damage to the left engine nacelle, "I've never seen an A-10 take this kind of damage and keep flying. How did you maintain control with this much structural damage?" Thorne pulled off her helmet, her auburn hair damp with sweat from the stress of flying a crippled aircraft through combat conditions. "The airplane did the heavy lifting, Sergeant Martinez. I just pointed it in the right direction." But Webb understood that what had happened over the Coringal Valley that morning went far beyond mechanical reliability or routine piloting skills. He'd watched the gun camera footage, studied the tactical geometry of each attack run, and analyzed the decision-making process that had enabled a single pilot to achieve what multiple aircraft had previously failed to accomplish. The mission would be written up as a routine close air support engagement, but everyone who had witnessed it understood that they'd seen something extraordinary. Major Thorne hadn't just saved 8 Navy SEALs. She demonstrated that the intersection of exceptional skill and unwavering determination could overcome tactical situations that appeared impossible on paper. 3 hours later, in the Bagram Medical Facility, Chief Washington sat beside the bed of Petty Officer Thompson, who was recovering from emergency surgery to remove shrapnel from his chest and abdomen. The SEAL team had been extracted successfully, their intelligence had been forwarded to higher headquarters, and their mission had been classified as a complete success. But Washington understood that their success had come at a price that went beyond the obvious costs of ammunition expended and aircraft damaged. Somewhere in the maze of military bureaucracy, a female Air Force major would have to justify her decision to continue a mission after taking battle damage, explain her tactics to officers who had never flown in combat, and defend her aggressive flying style to commanders who valued conformity over results. Thompson looked up from his hospital bed, his voice weak but determined. "Chief, did you get her name? The pilot who pulled our asses out of the fire." Washington nodded. "Major Cassandra Thorne, call sign Storm. And Thompson, if anyone ever asks you about what happened in that valley, you make sure they understand that we wouldn't be here without her." But as Washington spoke those words, he had no way of knowing that Major Thorne's battle was just beginning. The mission that had saved 8 American lives would also trigger a chain of events that would test everything she believed about duty, honor, and the price of being exceptional in a profession that didn't always reward excellence. The Coringal Valley had given up its secrets that morning, but it had also created new mysteries that would take months to unravel. And at the center of those mysteries was a female A-10 pilot whose willingness to attempt the impossible had just rewritten the tactical manual for close air support operations. The official after-action report would describe the mission in clinical terms: enemy forces neutralized, friendly casualties minimized, aircraft recovered with battle damage. But the real story was more complex, involving questions of risk management, gender dynamics in combat aviation, and the institutional challenges faced by military personnel who operated outside conventional parameters. Major Thorne's A-10 sat in the maintenance hangar at Bagram, its battle-scarred fuselage being examined by teams of engineers and technicians who were amazed that the aircraft had continued flying after sustaining such significant damage. The RPG impact had destroyed most of the left engine, damaged several flight control surfaces, and caused hydraulic leaks that should have made controlled flight impossible. Senior Airman Martinez worked alongside a team of specialists, documenting every piece of damage and cataloging the various systems that had continued functioning despite the battle damage. As he examined the titanium armor plating around the cockpit, he found dozens of impact marks from small arms fire, evidence of just how close Major Thorne had flown to the enemy positions. Sergeant Martinez called out Technical Sergeant Williams, the senior maintenance supervisor. "Have you ever seen battle damage like this on an aircraft that made it home?" Martinez paused in his inspection, considering the question carefully. In 8 years of maintaining A-10s in combat environments, he'd seen aircraft return with various levels of battle damage, but nothing quite like this structural damage that should have resulted in immediate mission abort, if not total loss of the aircraft. "No, Sergeant Williams. I've seen birds come back shot up pretty bad, but this is different. Look at this hydraulic system. She was flying on backup power for at least 3 of those gun runs, maybe more. And the flight control damage means she was fighting the stick the whole time." The implications were staggering. Major Thorne hadn't just completed her mission despite the battle damage. She'd executed complex attack profiles that required precise aircraft control while flying a machine that was barely responding to her inputs. It was a demonstration of piloting skill that bordered on the supernatural. But in the world of military aviation, supernatural skill could be as much a liability as an asset. The Air Force valued standardization, predictability, and adherence to established procedures. Pilots who operated outside those parameters, regardless of their results, often found themselves subjected to increased scrutiny and bureaucratic challenges. Colonel Webb understood the institutional dynamics better than most. As he reviewed the preliminary reports from Major Thorne's mission, he could already anticipate the questions that would come from higher headquarters. Why had she continued the mission after taking battle damage? Had she followed proper procedures for single-engine emergencies? Were her attack profiles within accepted parameters for close air support operations? The fact that she'd saved 8 American lives and eliminated a significant enemy force would be noted in the official record. But the Air Force bureaucracy would focus on procedural compliance, risk management, and whether her tactics created precedents that might encourage other pilots to take similar risks. Webb had been through this process before, watching exceptional pilots subjected to investigations and reviews that seemed designed more to discourage initiative than to understand success. The military's institutional bias toward conformity sometimes created perverse incentives that punished excellence while rewarding mediocrity. But this case felt different. The tactical situation had been unprecedented, the results had been unquestionably successful, and the skill level demonstrated had been extraordinary. If the Air Force couldn't recognize and reward this kind of performance, what did that say about its commitment to supporting the personnel who took the greatest risks on behalf of American ground forces? The phone rang in Webb.